just switch to Linux. Really? Linux users need to stop telling Windows users to just switch to Linux. Linux has its advantages over Windows, but it also has disadvantages. One of the biggest on Linux is lack of mainstream software support from companies such as Microsoft, and the lack of proprietary driver code for hardware is not the fault of Linux. It is the fault of NVIDIA, AMD, and Intel, as well as other vendors for not releasing the appropriate drivers in a timely fashion for Linux. Switching to Linux is not as easy as it sounds. Even the most beginner-friendly distros take some getting used to, and while Linux has a lot of variety compared to Windows, it certainly lacks that variety in terms of software. A chunk of free and open source stuff exists that is great, but not all of it can accomplish the same goals as the proprietary software. So many people rely on Windows because it has the largest software pool. The same is true for libraries of games. Old and new, they have always been and always will be made only for Windows because Windows has the huge dominant position it has had for such a long time in the history of computers. Linux is free and cost, but it is also free as in freedom, as in, you are free to do what you want with your computer, but the thing is, this takes lots of skill, especially when we are talking about modifying and redistributing a Linux distro. You have to be an expert programmer to be able to take advantage of the open source aspect of Linux, and, unfortunately, Linux is often hamstrung by its own free and open source software. What I mean by this is that it's limited no matter how good it is, especially if you're talking about video production, music production, and other professional tasks. Linux is just not suitable for any of that. I mean, you can use amazing free and open source video editors such as DaVinci Resolve, or Shotcut, or even OpenShot, but none of them compare to Sony Vegas Professional or Professional Video Editors, which are proprietary to Windows and Mac OS. Much the same applies to digital audio workstations on Linux. You're limited by the native plugins and instruments, and sadly, not many commercial ones exist. And the free ones that do exist are not user-friendly or intuitive to set up and use. Most people want something that's easy to use, and a lot of stuff on Linux is not easy or intuitive, so stop expecting them to be up for a challenge. Not everyone is capable of learning something new, nor are they capable of migrating to new and different software. You gotta understand that not everyone is a nerd when it comes to computers. Smarties like me like to help the less tech-savvy as much as we possibly can, but as much as I love Linux and often make content focused on it as a result, I don't expect everyone to use it or to even try it. That is totally on you, and I assume the majority of those watching my Linux videos are Linux users, or newly migrating users, or they could also be a newcomer just wanting to learn about Linux and see what it is. But not every Windows user switches to Linux. And the reasons why are so darn obvious I do not need to state them. Many are blissfully unaware that Linux exists, so how can we expect those generally ignorant folk to switch to Linux? No offense to anyone here, but if people are ignorant of the fact that Linux is even a thing, then they won't understand what it is until they grasp a basic comprehensive understanding of Linux. And not everyone is interested in the same thing. Linux only appeals to tech enthusiasts, software developers, programmers, nerds, geeks, and the list goes on and on. Need I say more? It is not targeted or marketed at home or enterprise users. Those who do use Linux in home or business environments would do so on a personal level, in the sense that their personal computer runs Linux. It could be an old laptop or something like that, maybe with Linux Mint or Peppermint OS. But who do you see out in public using a popular Linux distro like that? Probably nobody. Linux is not commercially viable for most businesses and home users. Most of these people use proprietary software which comes at a cost, and an imitation of running one OS or the other, presumably Windows and Mac OS. Sometimes Linux is included with some proprietary software, but this is not the majority of proprietary applications, because Linux is not the business standard on a desktop level. It might be what runs the internet and many other things, but for certainty, we all know it will never ever dominate the desktop market. Finally, Linux is very fragmented, which makes settling on a distro hard and overwhelmingly confusing. You're not sure what will suit your needs, wants, and preferences, and despite the large variety and populous existence of many distributions, that huge variety also makes picking the best distro the hardest part. What you think is best is different to another person's idea of best distro. So stop promoting a distro being better than another, and also stop promoting Linux desktop environments. Let people freely choose and test out what they want. Linux is all about freedom, liberty, privacy, and choice, not limitations, spyware, no freedom and no liberty, which is exactly what we have in the world of Windows and Mac OS. We do not want to see Linux go that same direction simply to compete, because it would ruin Linux as a whole, ruin the whole free open source philosophy. So we need to stop trying to market it as a Windows alternative or a Mac OS alternative. Please stop spreading this misinformation. You're tricking Windows users into thinking Linux is Windows, and that it can run their needed software. But what you're not taking into account is the fact that 99.9% of Windows software does not work on Linux natively, and using workarounds does not always get that software to work, as compatibility layers such as Wine and VirtualBox cannot always eliminate the issue of latency and other issues, no matter how powerful your hardware is. Although many want to switch to Linux and join the Linux elite, but when you're a Linux elitist, you're limiting yourself to free and open source software only, which can restrict you depending on what you're doing. If you're making music, then there is no doubt you will want access to awesome sounding synthesizers and other stuff, which guess what, only works on Windows or Mac OS. So good luck trying to find something that sounds the same that will work on your chosen Linux distro. You're gonna have to go dig around on the web. I thought you just had to rely on the software store in Linux. No, you do not tell people that whatsoever. You still have to rely on a web browser and search engine to find some software in Linux, and when you cannot find what you need in the built-in software store, you would generally jump to the web to find that thing you're looking for, wouldn't you? How can you download accessories to software or plugins without looking for them on the web? Also, some software in the software store may be outdated, so sometimes you will need to visit the official developer's site of the software you wish to use, and download and install the latest and greatest version that way. So telling people that Linux software store is all you need is utter bullshit. I mean, if you're not doing much, then you probably won't need to go on the web for all your programs, but if you want an extensive amount of programs to use, or you want to find other free and open source apps which are great, you have to read online and look at people's recommendations. The software store just isn't enough in Linux, at least in my opinion, and some stuff can only be used via the terminal, so you also need to be prepared to learn the terminal. If you don't, it makes using Linux that much harder, it really does. So, you silly people telling Windows and Mac users to just switch to Linux, please get a life and actually do something which we can benefit from, like contributing to the open source code of a Linux distro, or donating and funding a distribution's developers. That would really go a long way compared to your propaganda of Linux and your meme posts. You need to realize that Linux is just not for everyone, and that not everyone is capable of learning something new. So please stop telling everyone to switch to Linux. You're just preaching to the converted when you're doing that, or preaching to the converting, which is not bad, but the way you do it is not good. We need to educate the newcomers properly, not mislead them and fool them into thinking Linux is something that it simply is not, and many won't want to learn to use the terminal as it can prove daunting for many users. No friendly GUI to click on really makes the Linux experience fun, doesn't it? Not a single bit, but the terminal can be a quick and convenient way to perform various operations and tasks in Linux. We also need to help people better understand what Linux is, not give them this basic advice that Linux is a Windows alternative. You could say that, but it's not Windows. Linux is its own thing. It's actually often a one-trick pony in many cases. Certain distros can only do so much. For example, Tails OS is made for private browsing and accessing the deep and dark web, so it's not your run-of-the-mill operating system. Kali Linux is also a one-trick pony because it's used for security research, penetration testing, and hacking purposes, and then Ubuntu and Linux Mint provide you with a very basic but easy-to-use desktop environment which you can easily adopt to, and then Arch and Gentoo Linux provide the most minimalistic environment possible, giving you the potential to create your own Linux distro from the ground up, provided you have the skills to do this. And there are so many other distros with different target markets that the list goes on forever. But we really need to respect the Windows or Mac user's choice. The choice to not switch to Linux is a personal one, and you should not get angry or upset if a person does not appreciate Linux or try it. Instead, you should try your best to help them understand what Linux is, and why using it could come to their benefit. Please educate the newcomers to Linux the right way. No propagandizing them with misleading information. I am not saying every Linux content creator makes propaganda or is bad. I actually respect many popular Linux channels. The ones I am complaining about are the ones that do not go enough into detail about Linux and often mislead you through the video as a result. Please do more research before saying even idiots can use Linux. I mean, you're kidding me, right? When you say that, you're obviously joking. No idiot can use Linux, and who you deem as an idiot is completely subjective, so you guys need to start acting a little more up to the Linux expectations, and help newcomers understand the pros and cons of using Linux, as well as what Linux is, why it exists, and what distros are available. And if you're a newcomer, we strongly recommend you read up online guides about switching to Linux. Sites like How to Geek and Make Use of have great articles telling you how to transition to Linux, but videos are even better because you're seeing somebody demonstrate it, or you're seeing a presentation, or like my videos, there is a voice with images which help you picture an idea of what I am talking about, and I try to go into as much detail and be truthful as possible, and many of you great Linux content creators also do a great job of helping us. I will credit some channels I love, the Linux Tube, excellent videos about Linux, you really know your stuff, DistroTube, you're awesome, you delve deep into Linux and teach us a lot about it, explainingcomputers.com, you explain Linux in great detail and you often demonstrate many great software you can use in Linux, which better helps promote the free and open source apps included in the chosen distro, and there are many other Linux content creators I know and love. But the list is so extensive I might put that in the description or something, if you're interested in wanting to know which Linux channels I watch often. Anyway, that will do it for this video, folks. Please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. See you next video. Bye for now.